We're live. Hey everyone, welcome to This Week at Work, where we bring you the latest trending news on organizations, technology, and the future of work. I'm Chris Rainey, and as always, I'm joined by my partner in crime, Matt Burns. How are you?
I'm doing well. Yourself?
Yeah, I'm good. Beard's looking strong as always.
Thank you.
That's my measure of how you're doing. When I see you, I'm
Yeah.
like, if the beard's strong, then things are okay. It's
If we
like,
flash forward a year from now and there's more gray, you know this hasn't gone very well.
it's slowly spreading out. That's all right. I think you can pull off that look, that George Clooney type
I'm actually
look as
dyeing
well.
it in advance just to get ahead of it.
So you're
I'm
not even
dyeing it
grey. Yeah, you're not even grey
I-
actually, are you? You're just kind of
no,
trying
I'm
to go
good.
for
I'm
that.
actually 28. Yeah.
So Matt, what's happening this week at work? I think people probably clicked on the title and was like, oh, here we go again. So
A
we,
lot.
we spoke backstage of like the fit with Elon Musk of like, there's some things that we love about him and
Yeah.
other things are like, oh, like the problems that he's trying to solve for humanity were like tick, tick, tick. And then, and then you see some of his emails or some of his tweets or his posts and you're like, oh, who let him have control of those accounts? As well. So this is an interesting one. And kind of, I was like, let me kind of look into it a bit more before I kind of jump the gun. But anyone who sends their entire employee population an email with a subject line that says remote work is no longer acceptable as a subject line,
Yeah.
you're kind of asking for trouble there, aren't you?
I read a book this week on emails and
It wasn't
how
in,
to write.
was it not in there? Was it not in there as a suggestion?
It kind of was though. Like that's a very clear subject line. You don't need to open that email to know what's inside.
That's true.
So
Actually, that's a good point. Yeah. So yeah, we're making a joke about it, but you're right. If he was actually
yeah.
trying to communicate effectively and clearly, it
Yeah,
kind
he
of
nailed
did.
that part. The emotional intelligence piece might need some massaging, but the directness and clarity, I think he nailed.
I think
Yeah,
no one's surprised there's a lack of emotional intelligence from Elon Musk, as well. Yeah. So to get
yeah.
into it a bit,
It's a.
go on.
Go ahead.
So to get into it in more detail, so Elon Musk, they sent an email where he said all employees must work in office for at least 40 hours per week before they could work remote. What does that even mean? That means basically means what? So after I do my job, then I can have some time off. So it's I mean to work remotely. So you kind of is a bit of a weird statement to say, to be honest. Before remote work is acceptable, you have to work 40 hours. How many hours are they working?
More than 40, clearly.
Clearly, yeah. And he said in quotation, and this is quotation, a quote. If you don't show up, we will assume you have resigned.
Okay.
I'd love to know what people in the comments think about this, because it's almost hard to, after the conversations that me and you have every day in, day out with leaders and organizations across the world, to read something like this. I know we're making a bit of fun of it, but it's almost unbelievable to see what I'm reading. But he stands by, I think one of the arguments he mentioned is that, well, factory workers work more hours than this in the factories. And he's not wrong about that, is he?
No, he's not wrong. Here's the challenge, and it touches on his everything from the subject line to the messaging to the intention behind it. It lacks nuance. So he's talking about things in very binary terms. You're in the office, you're out of the office. We're remote working, we're not remote working. Life isn't like that. People aren't like that. And organizations, which are a collection of people, aren't like that. What do you say to somebody who actually has a bona fide requirement to work from home because they have childcare considerations? What do you say to somebody who has elder care considerations and needs to work from home? What do you tell the person that is considering working for Tesla and may contribute incredible value to the organization, but they don't live within 50 miles of one of the office facilities? So while I understand the sentiment, and clearly he has some rationale behind it, and I think we'll get into it in this conversation, Chris, but by taking such a hard line on this topic, I worry that he's alienating himself from not only us, like the general public, but more importantly, the people that work with him. And ultimately, they're the ones that drive the success of Tesla. And the Boring Company and SpaceX and Neuralink, and not just Elon. It's not a one person show. It's a collection of people who are delivering that value.
Yeah, he did add in there somewhere that we will assess people that on a case by case basis who do request it, but kind of after taking such a hard stance, it's very clear. You can't say all of that and be like, oh, by the way, we will have a conversation with you if you're one of those people that have to work from home. And his justification was also like he said stuff like in an email that, again, this is a quote: "That's why I lived in the factory for so much." You remember there's a story of him living in the factory, so that those on the line could see me working alongside them. If I haven't have done that, Tesla would have gone bankrupt, he wrote. And then he said, Tesla doesn't build great products by someone phoning it in, he added, i.e. phoning in or doing a Zoom call. So...
I mean, this is a conversation that's come up a number of times during the pandemic, and the topic of like workplace supervision. And Chris, you've seen articles, as I have, about employers that are now putting software on people's employees to be able to see if they're at their workstations. And like, I don't want to live in a world where I can't be trusted to put in an honest day's effort. I just don't want to live in that world. And I don't want to work in an organization where I'm constantly looking over my shoulder because somebody's looking over my shoulder and seeing if I'm doing my job. It's, again, a very narrow perspective on work, that being in an office 40 hours a week equates to full contributions. What if you're sitting at your desk and just kind of like mailing it in? As he puts it. What if you're taking the long way back to the water cooler and having chats with 10 people along the way? We all know those people in offices. I know lots of people who spend 50, 60 hours a week in the office and get nothing accomplished. So while I understand the sentiment, again, I think it's too narrow of a perspective to really encapsulate all the nuances in organizations. The solution to all this problem is to focus on what he's talking about: outputs. Focus on the outputs of what employees are delivering in your organization. And then it doesn't matter where they're working. They could be working in the facility, working on a beach. They could be working in, they're from their home. And I get it. For some employees, like manufacturing workers, some essential workers, they don't have that flexibility. And we could definitely have a conversation about equity when it comes to things like that. And Chris, I spent most of my career in retail, where I spent a very little of my time actually in retail locations, and the majority of time, in the head office. But I did spend enough time in retail locations to have an appreciation for what was happening. And while I wouldn't want to ever advocate for a situation where employees who are based in corporate offices never have a connection at all to the operating line or to the end user or to the customer, I do think we need to be clear and practical about where their work takes place and who they need to be collaborating with to get their jobs done. Yeah. So again, it's just, I take issue with just the harsh tone of this. And to your point, when you say remote work is no longer acceptable, and then have a little caveat at the bottom that will review things on a case-by-case basis, it sends a very clear message that if you choose to have remote work, I find it hard to believe that in those organizations that you won't have any negative consequences, either from promotability or career opportunities or access to information and influence, if you choose to work from home. Because it's been made very, very clear, this is the default and other things are the exception.
Yeah, Haley Bermel says his use of the phrase phoning it in is also very interesting to me, as it implies that remote work is somehow not real work, as if it hasn't been consistently shown that remote workers are working hours in excess around their meals, working late, etc.
Yeah. No, I think he's projecting a lot of his own views and his own circumstances into the situation. Just because you can go and sleep in the factory, Elon, or you can do those things, doesn't mean that fits everyone. And saying things like, if you don't show up, I'll assume you've resigned. Again, it's super clear. How would you, now I always wanted to ask you these questions when you were a CHRO, Matt, but I know you could only tread the line so much. So I'm going to ask you now, how would you react in an organization if you were the chief people officer of Tesla and you had a CEO like Elon? Just
if?
Yeah.
You say if, like it's never happened.
Oh yeah.
Every CHRO I've ever talked to has had a CEO like Elon Musk.
Yeah. I was trying to be nice about it, but yeah. Yeah.
And I guess here's my question back to you would be, am I responding after having read that article and not being consulted?
I mean,
or am I asking
you're
before?
giving your guidance and it's been ignored. That's what I'm getting at.
It happens. And I think one aspect of the HR role that many professionals outside the profession may not have a full appreciation of is the constant tension that you're playing with in terms of satisfying business interests and your personal ethics. And there's decisions that occur all the time in organizations that HR has to be part of, whether it's performance management, corrective action, hiring decisions, decisions around restructuring and laying people off, situations like this where it very much affects workplace culture and engagement, where my personal opinion may not mirror that of the decision that's made by the organization. And therefore I have a decision to make. Obviously I'm going to share my feedback. So in this situation, what I would likely do is express my concerns in a group setting. So I'm assuming Elon at Tesla has leadership team meetings and they have conversations and people get to share their perspectives. I would share it in that format. Additionally, I would find one-on-one time with him to have that conversation and just express to him some of the potential outcomes of this course of action so that he has the full perspective. I think a lot of times, senior leaders, in particular CEOs, will lean upon their HR leaders themselves to provide that emotional intelligence that may be missing from other conversations in the organization, and to provide some perspective on, here are some potential outcomes, here's potential consequences, here are some of the positive things that come from this. And my obligation as an HR leader is to ensure that the CEO has all the information that he, she, or they would need to be able to make that call. And once they have that, then I need to kind of put it in their hands because they're ultimately the ones making the decision. Now, where it gets really sticky, Chris, is if this is a line in the sand for me, and I strongly believe this is not the right thing to do, well, no, I have a decision that I have to make. And I can choose to take a stronger stand, but in some cases, I may have to vote with my feet. And I've talked to a lot of HR leaders that have, in the course of the pandemic, left their organizations because of how their organizations have handled items and decisions and the way they've conducted themselves during the pandemic. I mean, Chris, in 2020 of the spring, I was talking to leaders around the world, many of whom were given direct instruction by their CEOs to not let people leave the office, despite the fact that there was evidence at the time that there was a pandemic flowing through the organization and there was uncertainty around the consequences to people's health by letting them remain in the office. And there was a very hard line drawn in some jurisdictions around, we will stay in the office, we will stay in the office, we will stay in the office. Meanwhile, hospitalization rates are increasing, mortality rates are increasing. And it was a very trying time for a lot of HR leaders trying to balance not only their normal, workload, challenges, portfolio, but now they're having to handle facilities and health and safety
and their personal life.
And their personal. I was getting to that.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
It's a whole bunch of other things as well. So there's a ton of responsibility on those leaders. And to your point, they're balancing not only what's happening inside the organization, but what's happening outside of the organization. And it's not surprising to me that we see a lot of burnout in this profession over the last 2.5 to 3 years. They've taken a disproportionate amount of the brunt of what's happened. And they've had to make some really tough decisions along the way. So I don't envy people who find themselves in a position where they're in direct conflict from an ethical perspective with their organizations. And that's where you have to make tough decisions. And I get it. Like saying you should leave your job is really easy for you and I talk about on a live stream on LinkedIn when we're not the ones that have to bear the consequences of that decision. We don't have to pay their mortgage. We're not feeding their families. We don't have to worry about the reputation of not having a job and having to go apply for a job and the uncertainty around being able to find a similar job in terms of compensation and opportunity and location. It's difficult. And this is the reason why you need to have a really strong relationship with your senior leaders so that as things get to this point, you have the ability to be able to influence decisions. Now, in this case, I don't know. I mean, Elon's always had very strong opinions. I'm guessing influencing him is probably not the easiest course of action. So that leader needs to decide, is this where they want to work? Is this what they want to put their name behind? Is this what they can get behind in terms of an organizational best practice? And if the answer is no, then I think we'll find the answer up soon enough.
Yeah. I think with Elon in particular, people kind of know what they're getting into by now. I was just looking at some of the responses from his employees that they tweeted. I'm not going to read the names of the employees or But he responded to one of them and said, "You can go and pretend to work somewhere else." Just tweeted back at that person saying, "I'm reading this stuff with disbelief." You can go and pretend to work What message does that send? Like, what, they have over 100,000 employees? And I'm seeing my CEO write messages like that on social media in response to someone.
Yeah, it's "I don't trust you" is the first message. I don't respect you is a second message. I didn't see the message chain you're talking about. I don't know if the employee expressed something in a respectful way, but if the employee did, and that was the response, that's not a very respectful response. And I just expect more. And we're not talking about even, Chris, let's just strip away all the titles, and I expect more from an individual that I talk to in any context.
Yeah,
that's just not the way that you treat people. So the fact that it's a CEO and a high profile CEO is not, it just makes it more eye-catching for us because we can see it. And this behavior, unfortunately, does exist outside of this organization. So I think we just need to, in this case, make our opinions known, and with an understanding that ultimately this is an organization that will do what it's going to do. Elon's going to continue to move down this direction. I don't see him acquiescing. I don't see him changing his perspective. He's proven to be in the past quite stubborn about the things that he wants to achieve. And therefore, it's incumbent upon the people in that organization to ask themselves, is this where we want to work? And Chris, what we talked about going into this conversation actually was just the volume of layoffs and separations and people. I mean, the Great Resignation has been a buzzworthy article now for over a year. The reason we're seeing so many people leave organizations, look for new opportunities, is because they're finding themselves in difficult positions where, for whatever reason, whether it's an ethical conflict, whether it's a work design conflict, they need to have more flexibility. They need to be able to work from home. They're making decisions to leave with their feet. And you can draw a hard line in the sand. And I in one way, I kind of respect the clarity with which he's putting his opinion out there, because it sends a very clear message that if you're looking for remote work, hybrid work, this is not the place for you. And Chris, by the way, there are lots of employees that feel similarly, that want to be in the office 40 hours a week, that don't want to work from home. And they'll find a place in an organization like this where they'll be successful.
Yeah.
But where I actually take bigger issue in a lot of cases is organizations that project flexibility and project that they are woke and that they're doing the right things. But in reality, it's like what happens outside isn't what's happening inside.
Yep.
I'll give Elon credit in this sense. I have no doubts in my mind that what he's saying publicly is also happening privately.
100%. And it's like, this is what you're getting. Whether it's good or bad, whether you like it or not, he's super clear on this is what it means to work at Tesla. Whereas you are right, there are a lot of people that are selling the opposite story, and you get on the inside, you're like, wait a minute, this is not what I signed up for. As well, I also think it's important that he shouldn't bash on other companies and the way they work as well, because I'm not sure if you saw, I think a week ago when Apple announced their policy, Elon was again tweeting. And he tweeted a picture of the Apple office with a meme that said, "Put on your gym clothes and watch TV." Apple, in response to their new work from home policy. It's just super unnecessary to do that. He just finds a reason to be able to do that. But yeah, I think one of the concerns I had was, would this influence other companies to follow suit? Do you think that this may encourage other companies? I can't imagine, but you never know.
If you're a CEO of an organization and you're making decisions based on what Elon Musk is doing, yeah. I mean...
Yeah, it's true. It somehow works out for Elon. I don't know how. I'm still trying to figure out this craziness. But somehow it still works. And he still achieves mind-boggling achievements. But at the same time, I feel like you kind of can't have someone who has it all. It's interesting as well. But anyone listening would love to hear your thoughts and perspectives. Is there any more? Turn your mic up, by the way, bro. Yeah. You're a bit low.
So Hala Daga Chabani says, I like that, Matt. The Great Resignation equals the Great Awakening equals more employees are realizing that they need to be fulfilled doing work that is meaningful in a workplace. They are seen and valued for who they are.
Yeah, 100%. And people are not willing to choose. In the past, people, In the past, you had to choose between your work or your family.
Yep.
And people now over the last 2 years are like,
yeah,
I'm not gonna do that. Like, if you're asking me to choose between my mental health and well-being or a job, and again, that was something I did. I chose long working hours and money over my own personal mental health, and it clearly impacted me as well. I'm like, I'm not gonna do that anymore. And people are not gonna stay at organizations that don't listen and treat them with the respect that they deserve.
Well, because it doesn't make sense. And Chris, we've had this conversation
So many
a number of
times.
times
Yeah.
and shared my experience. Like, as a corporate executive at a very, very young age, I had this false belief that if I just scrambled and grinded and climbed my way to the top of the mountain, that once I got there, I could take a deep breath, take in the view, and kind of just not coast, but maybe not work 80 hours a week and alienate myself from all of my family and friends. But when you get to the top of the mountain, spoiler alert, there's just more mountain. And the moment you do take that breath, someone will push you off, or somebody will come up behind you and try and climb and take your position. And organizations, in most cases, especially organizations like the ones we're talking about today, they're not interested necessarily in my mental health. They're interested in the contributions that I'm making in service to the organization. And the moment that I stop making those contributions, they'll just find somebody else who's going to do it. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to find the balance that works. And there isn't a right or wrong answer. If you want to grind away and work 80 hours a week, and you want to grow your career, fill your boots. There's nothing wrong with that if you have the understanding of the trade-offs that you're going to make to achieve that lifestyle. You're probably not going to have a healthy relationship with your partner. You're probably not going to have a lot of friends. You're probably not going to have good mental and physical health. You might, but you're probably not. And you have to ask yourself, when it's all said and done and we look back on our lives, what's really important? Is it the fact that we had a fancy title and made an extra bit of money during the course of our lifetimes? Or is it that we had a chance to share it with people in our lives that were really special? And I don't want to get too, Pollyanna about this conversation, but I'm so passionate about the idea of work being part of something that we can blend into our lives. It can't be our entire lives. And for Elon, it's very, very clear. Work is his life. He's very, very open about the fact that he works exceptionally long hours. And what he doesn't talk a lot about is his family or his children or his ex-spouses, or like, he doesn't talk about those things because clearly they're not in his life. They don't pass the muster. He talks about his businesses. He talks about scientific achievements. He talks about the research that he's doing and the things that he's acquiring, because for him, that's the way in which he views the world. And in a lot of ways, it's the mentality you need to have if you're going to be a founder CEO and grow your companies to the size that he has. You need to almost have that obsessive attention
literally
on growing
on
your business.
Yeah, literally slept on the factory floor every day. So,
Correct. But I would love to hear from his family and his kids and his ex-wives and how that's going.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think one thing I learned the hard way was, no success makes up for failure in the home. And I think that took me a long while to realize that, no amount of success I'm having at work makes up for a failure in my home. And when I quit my job and started HR Leaders, less than half, I was making a quarter of what I was making in my full-time role. But I was saying even to Bruno, our producer, just before we went live, I'd never been so happy. If you told me my younger self that I would, maybe making a quarter of what I was making, would I be happy? I'd be like, no, I'll be miserable, I'll be terrible. I was so happy to wake up in the morning and walk Robin to nursery, spend time with her playing, going to the park, spending more quality time with my wife, having dinner at the table together, being able to cook, and whilst I'm cooking, look up and see my daughter playing, my wife there, and being like, oh, this is what it's about. And being able to work with one of my best friends to bring HR Leaders to life, and to meet people like you, Matt, and Bruno as well. So I'm like, even now I'm still not making as much money as I used to, but I've never been happier. As well, I spend money on HR signs now. and sofas. Anyways, but listen, I think that's all we've got. Anything else you want to say before we wrap up, Matt?
I'm in a mastermind group with a number of entrepreneurs that I'm very fortunate to be part of, and I'm fortunate because they're all absolute bosses in their own businesses in their own way. And they also think similarly, Chris, in that they're trying to find balance with their families. They're trying to show up in relationships. They're trying to do the best they can to balance it all. And one of the quotes that somebody shared this week in our meeting has stuck with me since, and I've been saying it almost in every conversation because it's just resonated so deeply. And I'm going to butcher it by paraphrasing it because it's from Socrates, one of the great philosophers.
And now you're going to get it wrong.
I'm totally going to get it wrong. It's fine. He doesn't know, so we're fine there. The sentiment essentially is that the secret to happiness isn't acquiring more, it's learning to be happier with less. Well, that was really powerful.
No, 100%. That's something I'm working on with my coach as well, because my obsession is always around what's next. And it's very rare I take time or we take the time to sit down and talk about what we're grateful for. So I try to do that more often now in the mornings. I actually have it written on the front. I actually have it on the front of my phone. I have a list of 6 things, and one of them is really kind of having that attitude of gratitude. And I say out loud whilst getting ready in the morning. My wife thinks I'm crazy sometimes. I just start saying out loud all the things that I'm grateful for constantly, because we get so caught up in what we're trying to run towards, and we don't appreciate how far we've come. And it's really hard to do that. Like everyone's always focused on what we don't have, right? Rather than what's right in front of you. As well. I think that's a good place to leave things.
Before we wrap up, we've got a question from Caitlin.
Okay.
Who says, for those leaders who really love in-person connection with their teams, how would you advise they share that?
Well, Bruno, why don't you give them an example of how we did that recently with our team in person, when you ran at me in 100 miles an hour and pushed me over?
Zorb football.
Football. Yeah, like I'm making a joke about that, but we to answer that question, the way we do it at HR Leaders, we are intentional. You have to be more intentional about creating those moments, because working virtually, you're not going to bump into someone in a water cooler in your bedroom. So what we do here is we were more intentional about making those moments happen. We came to an agreement as a team, that we would meet every Monday, and that day is dedicated to actually collaborating, coming together, ideation, creation, not sitting at computers. And then once a month, again, this is just for us. I appreciate not everyone can do this, but once a month, the team votes on what they want to do as a team activity, and then we have fun. And we just sometimes we spend a whole day. We don't even do any work. We just go out and have fun. And this week we went to zorbing, which is when you get in a giant inflatable ball and you run into each other, because apparently that's what the employees wanted to do this month. I think I'm still hurting, Bruno, from when you knocked me over into the wall. But yeah, it was fun. And then we went for a meal. And so I'd say just be intentional. Don't assume what your team wants, first and foremost, or what your employees want. Ask the question, listen, be intentional. And that's what's worked for me. But again, that's just worked for us. I appreciate it'll be different for everyone. Matt, you want to jump in?
We are relationship-oriented social creatures, and we will do our best work when we feel connected to the people around us. And that doesn't happen by accident. So I completely agree with you, Chris. And it doesn't happen by putting people into the 4 walls of a building and telling them to sit at their desks either. Yeah. You need to create organic opportunities for people to connect. And organizations that do that best are the ones that are going to have success. So for every organization or every employee that decides they don't want to work at a company that has more restrictive workplace practices, the companies that will benefit from that are the ones that are more flexible, are more open, because they'll have the ability to get the top talent that is going to appreciate having the freedom of responsibility.
Yeah, definitely. And also involve more. One thing we did unintentionally is we also involve family members. So, this week, Ken, who's one of our employees, his partner came. We got to meet their daughter. And just bond and learn more about each other and your backgrounds and unique quirks and really what people value. And it's just a different dynamic to do that. And just bonding over a drink and a meal and apparently running over people with giant ball like inflatable balls is the way we do it. I think next month we're doing like a VR experience, which is going to be interesting.
Oh yeah.
Let's see how we do that. I'll probably run into a wall. I'll have a black eye on the next episode, Matt. And do that. Any more questions, Bruno?
No, I think that's everything. And just a reminder for all those tuned in to join us every Friday at 3 p.m. where we'll be doing this weekly.
Yeah, 3 p.m. every Friday. We make Matt get up really early to come and do this. I called him at 6 a.m. today by accident, so my bad. Matt, where are you?
Up.
He's like 6 a.m. Chris. Maybe just give me a few, give me an hour. But if on another note, if you're watching this, please like, comment, share, subscribe to the HR Leaders podcast. Follow Bento HR on LinkedIn. Follow HR Leaders on LinkedIn as well, and also just tag in a colleague in the comment section now that you feel would enjoy the episode. That's all we ask. It's free. Make sure we want to ramp up the LinkedIn algorithm. So hit the like button, and we'll see you all next week. But have a great weekend, everyone. Bye. Bye.